the analogy you used in your bulletin at the beginning was that it was like Britain invading Ireland or England invading Ireland, but it would only, well, Britain invading Ireland, it would only be like Britain invading Ireland if Westminster were in Dublin. And I think we ignore as ever history at our peril. And I know, William Hague is a student of history, and he'll understand how complex and intertwined Ukrainian and Russian identity really is. And I'm sorry, I'm a bit tired of Western politicians telling me that, even though we have great big armies and we force project all over the world and we have a huge nuclear arsenal, there's nothing we can do in these circumstances. Well, why do you have a big nuclear arsenal? And, what are the geostrategic realities here? I mean, Ukraine has been a pawn in a soft conflict already between the European bloc, which is not perfectly allied anymore with the former global hegemon, the US, and a Russian, demagogic expansionist power. I mean, again, read your history. This was never going to end well. And at the beginning of the week, the West's response just basically was a green card for invasion. Anybody who has any understanding of politics over the last few days and history would have known that he was going to roll in today. And William Hague's analysis is exactly correct, and your experts are right. He'll aim to knock out the government very, very fast, and we're in a very powerless position now. What could the West have done? As Libby Purvis says, not pimp out its finance economy to the Russian oligarchs. Yeah, that would be a real start. Not allow them having undue influence, including with the Conservative Party who are currently in government here. And it's no wonder, all power to William Hague, who I respect, for trying to appear statesmanlike at a moment like this, but it's not a good look in the West. And it's not a function of saying we have such a strong democracy and strong ideals. It's actually because we've got a weak democracy that we're in this position.
William Hague, on that point, it's an interesting question there about the extent to which, as a country, as your party as well, it's fair to that accusation has been fairly lodged as well, has got too close to Russian money. The London property market is propped up by it. Lots of financial institutions are. We don't know how many companies are involved because Companies House is deliberately left obfuscated and unclear. That's a problem here, isn't it? That we don't have entirely clean hands when it comes to Russia.
Well, there's got to be big changes in those things now. There is absolutely no doubt about that. And I'd be very surprised if in the things the government announces, there's not a lot of action on that. I would say one thing on that there are good Russians and bad Russians like there are in any country. And so you do get, of course, people who've tried to move their assets or families out of Russia because they don't like Putin and they don't want to be in Putin. So we shouldn't get into a sort of Russophobia here, that there's something wrong with all Russians and everything that they do. So we do have to bear that in mind. And I think there is the Russian influence.
I have to interrupt. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt here.
Yes.
That capital, you say these were opponents of Putin, but implicitly by receiving their capital and allowing them to acquire citizenship here and invest, we were taking an oppositional position to begin with. I remember, William Hague, that you had a judo bout with Vladimir Putin, and you are frankly, I respect you as a thinker on foreign affairs. It disappoints me to see you misunderstand, roll back on what you said about Putin in the past. He's a consummate strategist. He saw Western weakness, and here are the consequences.
That's exactly what I've been writing the last few weeks, that he's seen the West off balance, that he's taken his moment. And he's been set on that for months now. So I absolutely agree with that. No, I'm only making the point about there's a whole wide range of Russians, being no doubt about that. And there is Russian influence in many political systems. I think not so much in the UK political system, I must say, because I haven't come across, I've never felt, and I've been out of politics for 7 years now. But I never felt in the past.
But they're big donors. Hang on, William Hague, they're big donors, aren't they? They're big Russian donors to the Conservative
Don't
Party.
translate. First of all, they're not all friends of Putin. I hope they're not. And secondly, the influence over the policy of the Conservative Party is zero. I can't remember any occasion in 25 years at the top of the Conservative Party where I would ever be remotely influenced by the fact that Russian gave them money to the Conservative Party. So we shouldn't aim at all the wrong targets here. There is a lot to do here without sort of beating ourselves up for things we haven't done wrong. There's a heck of a lot to do in order to be much stronger, more effective in the Western world.
Just finally, William, before I know you've got to go, but before you go, can you just do you worry about NATO countries? Because Will Self there made the point, right? We've got all this army, we've got all these threats, but they do get engaged if NATO countries get involved, because that's part of the constitution of NATO. Do you worry, as we heard from a NATO general, that his eyes go to some of the Balkan countries?
Well, I don't think that is immediate. I think this is a really premeditated plan to occupy most of Ukraine very quickly. I don't think Putin will be intending to move on to NATO countries. He does not want a war with the whole of NATO. But of course, for the future, unless there is a sufficiently strong response from the West for this, and the reinforcement of NATO countries such as the Baltic countries, they were mentioned in his latest rambling speech from Moscow, well, then there is a threat in the future. This is where appeasement does come in. So this is a new world from today in which the eastern frontier of NATO has to be a lot better protected than it has been for, well, since the end of the Cold War. And there will be costs to Western countries for that.
William Hague, thank you very much for your time. I know you're a busy man. You're in demand this morning. So William Hague, of course, former Foreign Secretary and Times columnist William Hague. I'll continue this discussion for a bit longer with Times columnist Libby Purvis and the author Will Self. Libby, I wanted to ask you actually about, we keep talking about the Western response, which of course is very important. But I'm also interested, because we spoke to our Moscow correspondent, about the Russian response to this, the response of the Russian people. We have heard Vladimir Putin being characterized as an increasingly remote, isolated, slightly rambling character, more so than usual. Apparently he's because he's been isolated because of coronavirus, and he's become cut off from his advisors, etc. Do you have any hope that the Russian people, once we see what plays out in Ukraine, once we have the television pictures of, things that are going to happen there in terms of perhaps buildings and infrastructure being attacked, that the Russian people will have to say, or some of them will say, not all of them, will have to rise up in numbers and say, no, we don't want to be part of this?
Oh, the dream of a new and ideally bloodless Russian revolution against Putin, the Tsar Putin, is absolutely, it's a tempting thought, but I don't know. I mean, he has impoverished his people, but they are the ones with not enough power and gumption probably to rise against him. This is why I'm saying, let us make life really difficult for the big financiers. Let us make, for his cronies, let's make things economically difficult for them right across the world. Americans, have already moved. We have already moved on some Russian banks. We should be moving on a lot more. But I don't think. I mean, the problem is that there probably is a certain desperate old hankering for the USSR. Return to the great union of all Soviet socialist republics. Some people will still be on that side, just as some people still dream of empire here in Britain. Most, I think, probably don't, but I do think that probably is, there's some power in that, and there is a power and a temptation in the idea of the big man, the strong man, who tells the world what he's going to do and does it and shrugs. I mean, it's horrible, but it does exist, that feeling.
Will Self, do you think that feeling still exists amongst the Russian people to the extent that it might have done 10 years ago?
I think people underestimate the extent and the depth of both Russian nationalism and Russian imperialism at their peril. And it doesn't just go back to the Soviet regime. These Russian expansionism was at its peak in the 16th and 17th centuries. There's never been, apart from the hetmanate of the Ukraine in the 16th century, there's never really been an effective Ukrainian entity. It's a debatable land that's been occupied by many, many powers. And you absolutely, at your peril, underestimate the Russian people if you don't think that they feel that Ukraine is part of Russia, because they do. And Putin or not, what he's playing on a very, very good tune with Russian people. I think the West just don't seem to grasp this at all, or understand the history of this, or of the last 10 years since the Maidan revolution of 2013, what actually has happened in Ukraine. I'm not so sure how many people in Britain are aware that Ukrainians can travel all over the Schengen area just on a passport now. I'm not sure if people in the West have any inkling of how that's viewed in Russia at all. And it's exactly as if Ireland were now trying to secede to Russia, if you want to push the analogy that far. And you know, I think people, all of this sort of frankly tit beating about our great Western values and how could this happen for us? We've just seen the West walk out of Afghanistan with incalculable humanitarian costs, when our only moral strength in that part of the world was that we weren't the Russians, we weren't the Soviets. And what? A 14-year British deployment that costs something like 500 British servicemen and women. You know, those are the costs that Britain was prepared to exercise, a lot, as well as a hell of a lot of materiel. And again, you think this isn't noticed in other parts of the world?
No. Okay.
I mean, sorry.
No. Well, I understand it. You know, this is.
It makes me feel quite nauseous, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And everything that has happened overnight has definitely awoken a lot of very intense feelings in many people, and we understand that. Thank you, Will. That's Will Self, author and journalist. We also heard from Libby Purvis, Times columnist. It is 9:29 Times Radio Breakfast.
It is the most significant event in Europe since the Second World War. Absolutely, this is a member of the United Nations Security Council, permanent member of the UN Security Council, charged with maintaining international peace and security in the world, deciding unprovoked to invade on a massive scale a neighboring country, no doubt with great loss of life to come. And so that is something we haven't seen. We haven't seen that in the world since 1945. And it's an immense event, and it changes the world. Things do look very grim for Ukraine because, as we've discussed on this program before, his plan, Putin's plan, well, it's what I wrote in my column. I have to say, sadly, last week, which is to invade on three sides and on the inside, no doubt, and to move very quickly. To cut off large parts of Ukraine. So I'm not surprised to hear tanks driving towards Kiev. I think they will try to disable the ability of the Ukrainian government to function very, very quickly and be aiming to do that in the next 2 or 3 days. So it's an extremely grave situation.
I asked the former Russian ambassador, the ambassador of the UK to Russia, this. This is clearly Putin's responsibility and fault. Obviously, he's the agent in all of this. Have we appeased him? Have we opened the door to him? Richard Sheriff, the general, said we've basically downgraded our army for years and years and years and years, and Putin spies weakness and he can exploit it. When he started making these noises, we imposed very little sanctions. He spies weakness and will exploit it. Is that what's happening? Has the West allowed him to get to this position, do you feel?
Well, it's not our fault in the West. You know, I mean, we have a very open democratic society, and we debate all the options and whether we could have done something to avert it, and that is quite right. But this is not something which somebody in the West has inadvertently brought about. This is a man, in effect, a dictator in his country, who has decided himself that he is going to do this irrespective of the human consequences, and what he objects to is the existence of a free people who want to determine their own future on his border, because their freedom is a threat to him. So it's not the West's fault. If you go back now and think, should things have been handled in a different way? Well, then there are lots of things where you can say that, you know, that Ukraine shouldn't have been offered membership of NATO in 2008, but they're not given membership of NATO. They've been left in limbo, which leaves them in an extremely difficult situation. And indeed, had everybody known Putin was going to do this, well, many efforts to improve relations wouldn't have taken place in recent years. There should just have been a tougher line all along. Don't mess with any neighboring country or you'll be in big trouble with all of us. So I think, you know, one can always go back over history, but it's not our fault in the West that Putin has created this kleptocratic, deeply corrupt regime that can only maintain its financial and political power around a clique of people around him by making sure that countries on their border cannot develop in any free, democratic, and prosperous way. He has created this crisis, not the Western world.
Um, William Hague, let's talk about what's happening today, though. We keep talking about what can we do to stop Vladimir Putin. So nothing we've done so far has stopped him. The invasion of Ukraine is in progress as we speak. There's a Cobra meeting going on right now, and Boris Johnson's going to update Parliament later on. What do you think? Actually, this is day one of who knows how many days. This is an important day, and it's important to set the tone, I suppose. So what do we as a country have to come out and say? And what do we as a country have to come out and say we are going to do?
Well, you're quite right. This is day one, and on day one, a lot of important things have to happen. At least 4 things I can think of. That if I was still in government and on my way to that Cobra meeting, I'd have that list in my mind. The first is humanitarian. You've been hearing on this program about people on the move. Well, hundreds of thousands or even millions of people are going to end up somewhere, and they are going to need a lot of looking after. And we have a big aid budget in this country. Well, this is what it is for. So first of all, there's that humanitarian mobilization to be done. Second, to impose before the end of today the biggest and most comprehensive package of sanctions on Russia that has ever been seen, so that the promise of that is fully fulfilled. And that will have to be pretty big and sweeping in order to match up to that promise. Third, there's the issue of, is there any military aid? Ukraine's not a NATO country, and we won't be sending our armed forces to defend them. But is there any other military aid which, even at this stage, would help the Ukrainians and to reduce loss of life in the Ukrainian armed forces in particular? And fourth, there's the diplomatic scene, because it's vital this is debated immediately at the United Nations Security Council in New York, and that there is a vote to condemn this, and that therefore nations around the world have to say where they stand. What is China's excuse for having Putin's back? Are they really going to support or to acquiesce in one sovereign country invading another? Is that Chinese foreign policy now? So countries have to be put on the spot. So that all of those 4 things, that's day one, morning one of this invasion. That's what the government needs to be tackling.
That's very comprehensive, and I'd like to believe that's what's been going on in Cobra in the last couple of hours.